Is this what we planned?
Everything she owns is finally in my bag.
You played your role perfectly.
And after the surgery?
When she's too weak to fight back, we'll finish the second part.
Then the empire becomes ours.
She'll never know her own husband betrayed her.
It was the quiet sound of signatures being signed inside that cold hospital room that made the nurse stop at the door. Tolani was sitting up in the hospital bed with a thick plastic tube running into her arm. Her face pale and swollen, her breath coming in short, painful gasps. Her hands were shaking so much that the blue pen almost fell from her fingers, but she forced herself to sign the last page of the paper. Standing right beside the bed, watching every move of the pen with sharp eyes, was her older sister, Morenike. Morenike did not offer to hold the clipboard. She did not offer a cup of water. She just waited until the last line was signed. Then she reached out and snatched the paper away, blowing on the fresh ink before slipping it straight into her handbag. Tolani looked up at her, tears running down her face, her voice nothing more than a dry whisper. "Oga, see what my own sister is doing to me," Tolani thought in her heart. She asked Morenike if she was happy now that she had taken everything their father left behind. Everything Tolani had worked 10 years to build while Morenike was away enjoying life. Morenike did not even blink. She bent down close to Tolani's face, her voice cold, and told her that money was not compared to the 10 years she had walked the streets of the town with nothing in her pockets, while Tolani lived like a queen. She looked at the gold ring on Tolani's finger and told her to save her tears for the operating room because if her kidney did not work inside Tolani's body, at least the paper in her bag were already legally binding. Lagos does not pity a weak person, and Morenike knew it. The tension in that small, air-conditioned world was so thick you could feel it in your throat. Just 2 days ago, Tolani was one of the most powerful women in the city, managing a massive business empire, riding big cars and living in a big house in Ikoyi. Then out of nowhere, her body just gave up. She collapsed right in the middle of a board meeting, gasping for air. By the time they rushed her to the hospital, the doctors gave the family the worst news of their lives. Her organs were shutting down completely. It was an aggressive, sudden failure. The doctors searched everywhere for a matching donor, but time was running out fast. Tolani had only days left. That was when Morenike showed up. She had walked out of the family home 7 years ago after a massive quarrel with their late father. Their father had stripped Morenike of every single kobo and left the entire estate, the family properties and the business empire to Tolani. Morenike had vanished into thin air, leaving no address, taking no calls. But the moment the news hit the family that Tolani was at the point of no return and needed a donor, Morenike suddenly appeared at the hospital gate. She walked into the hospital room not with prayers, not with tears of her suffocating younger sister, but with a lawyer standing right behind her. She went to the lab, did the tests, and by some unexpected twist of fate, she was a perfect match. The doctor called it a blessing, but Morenike called it an opportunity. She sat across from Tolani and gave her a simple choice. She would give up one of her kidney to keep Tolani alive, but only if Tolani signed legal documents, handing over the entire family inheritance back to her. Every house, every bank account, every piece of land. Tolani's husband, Femi, had pleaded with Morenike on his knees, right there in the hospital hallway, cried and held her wrapper, begging her to show mercy on her own flesh and blood sister. He told her that Tolani was her sister, the same girl she grew up with, the same girl she used to share her food then when they were little. But Morenike had just pushed his hands away and told him that mercy does not pay rent in Lagos. She gave them 6 hours to make up their mind, sign the papers, and watch Tolani fade away forever. Now, sitting in that dim room with the ink still drying on the legal documents, Tolani closed her eyes as the nurses came in to prep her for the morning operation. Morenike adjusted her lace blouse, zipped up her handbag tight, and walked out into the corridor. She walked down the long, quiet hallway towards the waiting area. The smell of antiseptic was strong in the air. As she reached the quiet corner near the emergency stairs, a shadow moved from behind the pillar. It was Femi. Morenike stopped walking. She did not look surprised to see him. Femi stepped out into the dull yellow light of the hallway. The tears that had been on his face just an hour ago while he was begging her in front of the doctors were completely gone. His face was calm, calculation written all over his posture. He looked around to make sure no nurse was nearby. Then he stepped closer to Morenike. Morenike reached into her bag, pulled out the signed documents and held them up. She looked at Femi and asked him if this was what he wanted. Femi took the papers, looked at Tolani's trembling signature at the bottom, and a slow smile spread across his face. He looked at Morenike and told her that she did well. Then he leaned in and whispered that once the surgery was over and Tolani was weak and recovery, they would execute the second part of the agreement, making sure that Tolani never had the strength or the legal standing to challenge what they had just taken from her. Morenike stared at him for a long moment, her eyes fixed on her sister's husband, holding the secret that would completely destroy whatever was left. The hospital world grew cold as night fell over town. Inside the dark corridor, Femi stood close to Morenike, his voice barely a breath against the wall. He reached out and touched the corner of the signed papers, his fingers brushing against Morenike's hand. He told her that she had played her part perfectly, just as they had discussed in secret 3 weeks ago. Morenike did not smile. She pulled her hand back, her face hard like rock. She looked Femi in the eyes and reminded him that she did not do this for him. She did it because their father had treated her like trash, treating Morenike like a saint while leaving her to rot in mud. Femi leaned closer, his eyes glistening in the dim light of the emergency exit. He told her that it did not matter why she did it, as long as the outcome was the same. He reminded her of the plan. The moment Tolani survived the operation, Femi would file for an immediate divorce, using a fabricated medical incompetence claim, leaving Tolani with nothing, while he and Morenike shares the family property right away. Morenike looked at her sister's husband, a man who had sworn before God and family to love Tolani until the end of time. She saw the absolute lack of shame in his eyes. My conscience has been dealing with me, Morenike. Morenike thought for a split second, but she pushed the feeling deep down into her chest. She told Femi that if he tried to double-cross her when the money landed, she would destroy him before he could even have time to enjoy the money. Femi just laughed quietly, patted her shoulder, and turned back towards the main waiting room to put his sad husband's face back on for the nurses. Inside the private room, Tolani lay motionless under the harsh white lights. Her hands were cold, her lips dry and cracked. A quick knock sounded on the door and the head surgeon walked in, carrying a dark folder under his arm. He looked at Tolani with heavy eyes, then looked at Femi, who had just walked back into the room looking like a heartbroken spouse. The doctor cleared his throat and asked Femi to step outside for a private discussion regarding the pre-surgery panel results. In a quiet office down the hall, the doctor spread the chart across his desk. He pointed his pen at a series of red lines printed on the lab reports. He looked at Femi and delivered the complication. The blood test revealed that Tolani's organ failure was not a natural sudden illness. Her system was full of heavy metallic toxins that had been slowly introduced into her body over the last 6 months. Sun has been spiking her bit by bit, destroying her internal organs until her body finally collapsed. Femi was shocked. He was surprised, but he quickly dropped his head into his hands, pretending like he cared, whereas he doesn't care. He asked the doctor how much a terrible thing could happen, swearing that Tolani only ate food cooked at home by their personal chef. But the doctor lowered his voice and revealed the twist that made Femi's heart stop in his chest. The doctor explained that when they tested Morenike's blood for compatibility, they found the exact same trace elements in Morenike's system, but in tiny non-lethal doses. The doctor looked straight at Femi and said the lab confirmed that the source of the toxins was a custom herbal tonic that Morenike had been sending to the family house every month from her hideout, claiming it was a traditional reconciliation gift for her sister. Femi froze. The truth hit him like a heavy blow to the stomach. Morenike had not just shown up by coincidence when Tolani got sick. Morenike had been systematically destroying Tolani's health from a distance for half a year, creating a very medical emergency that would force Tolani to sign over the inheritance. Morenike had played everyone, including Femi. She had used Femi's greed to make her plan smooth, but she was the mastermind behind the whole plot. Before Femi could even process the horror of what he just heard, the office door busted open. A head nurse ran in, her face pale, calling for the surgeon. Tolani's monitors in the room were screaming with high-pitched alarms. Her blood pressure was crashing to dangerous levels, her breath cutting off entirely. The toxin in her system had reached a critical threshold, threatening to shut her heart down completely before the morning surgery could even begin. The doctor grabbed his instruments and rushed down the hall, with medical staff running behind him. Outside in the corridor, Morenike stood by the glass window, watching the doctor scramble around her dying sister. Femi marched up to her, his face dark with rage, grabbing her arm tightly near the staircase. He whispered in a harsh, furious voice, asking her what she had done with that herbal mixture she sent to the house. Morenike did not pull away. She looked at Femi with a cold, terrifying, calm voice, her voice barely audible over the chaotic beeping of the life support machines. She looked at him straight in the eyes and whispered that nobody gets rich in Lagos by accident. And if Tolani did not survive the next 2 hours to reach the operating table, the signed document in her handbag meant that every piece of the empire belonged to Morenike alone, leaving Femi with absolutely nothing. The hospital corridor was a war zone of running feet, shouting doctors and screaming medical monitors. Through the glass window, Tolani was stretching on the bed, her face turned up towards the white ceiling as oxygen was pumped into her lungs. The doctors were calling out numbers, injecting medication directly into her IV line, fighting to stabilize her pulse, just enough to wheel her into the operating room. Outside, Femi stood frozen against the wall, his hands shaking violently. He looked at Morenike, realizing that the whole situation was spinning out of his own control. He stepped close to her and whispered angrily, asking her if she was completely crazy, reminding her that if Tolani passed away on that bed before the surgery even started, the police would perform an investigation and find the spike and trace every bit of it back to her. Morenike did not move a muscle. She did not move an inch. She looked at Femi with her dark eyes and told him that in Lagos, a poor person goes to jail, but a person holding documents to a massive estate hires the best lawyer and works freely. She told him to keep his mouth shut and let the doctors do their work. Before Femi could even reply, the double doors of the ward swung open. The head surgeon rushed out, his gown already covered in sweat. He told them that there was no more time to wait for morning. They had to take Tolani into the operating theater immediately or her heart would stop within an hour. Nurses wheeled the bed out to the top speed, the metallic wheels clutching against the tiled floor. Morenike walked alongside the stretcher, staring down at her sister's pale face. For a split second, Tolani opened her eyes, her weak fingers reaching out, barely touching Morenike's wrist. Tolani looked up at her elder sister, her lips moving without sound. Before she could manage to utter a few painful words, "Please stay strong for me. I never hated you." Morenike pulled her wrist away as if she had been burned, her chest tightening, but she forced her face to stay like stone as the big doors of the theater slammed shut behind the surgical team. Inside the operating room, under the blind white surgical lamps, the air was thick with the steady panic beam of the heart monitor. Tolani lay open on the table, her pulse dropping rapidly towards a flat line. The surgeon turned his head towards the small observation window where Morenike stood in the surgical scrubs, her face pale as paper. The doctor's voice came over the intercom, loud and urgent. He told her they had reached the point of no return. Tolani's body was collapsing under the shock of the spike. If Morenike went through with the donation right now, the stress on her own body would be severe, and Tolani's heart might still fail on the table, leaving Morenike with one kidney and a dead sister. But if she backed out now, the doctors would close Tolani up, place her on life support, and let nature take its full course within hours. The choice was entirely hers, and there were only few seconds left to decide. Standing right behind Morenike in the prep room, Femi grabbed her shoulder, his fingers digging into her skin. He leaned into her ear. In a desperate whisper, he told her to walk away now, to let the doctors to stop the procedure. He reminded her that if Tolani passed away naturally from organ failure without the surgery completing, the signed documents in her handbag were already legal, making Morenike the sole owner of every house, every bank account, and every plot of land, with no questions asked. He whispered that this was what they had fought for, that the money was finally theirs. Morenike looked at her sister's face through the glass. Tolani looked so small, so defenseless, stripped of all her wealth and power, fighting for a single breath of air. Memories flooded Morenike's mind, not of the bitter quarrel with their late father, but of two little girls sharing a single plate of rice in their small childhood room, of Tolani always giving her the bigger piece of meat. She looked down at her hands, then reached out into her handbag, pulled out the signed inheritance documents, and tore them right down the middle, letting the pieces fall to the floor. Femi's eyes went wild with horror, reaching out to grab the torn papers. Morenike turned around and looked him straight in his eyes with absolute disgust. She told him that she had spent 7 years blaming her sister for her own bitterness, but she would rather walk the streets of the town with abject poverty for the rest of her life than let a monster like him profit off her sister's suffering. She pushed Femi hard against the wall and shouted at the doctors to proceed with the surgery immediately, ordering them to take her kidney and save her sister's life, no matter the costs. 2 weeks later, the morning sun broke over the town, filling the private hospital room with warm lights. Tolani was sitting up in bed, weak and tired, but her color had returned, her new kidney working perfectly inside her body. Standing at the foot of the bed was a police officer, holding a pair of heavy iron handcuffs. Sitting on a corner chair was Femi, handcuffed by the policeman. The medical examiner had traced the toxin directly to Femi's secret bank transaction and personal belongings, revealing that he had been adding tiny amounts of poison to Tolani's food for months, and framing Morenike's herbal gifts to clear the path for himself to take control. The door opened, and Morenike walked into the room, leaning heavily on the wooden walking stick, her body still sore from the major operation. She did not look at Femi as the officer led him out of the room to face trial. She stopped at the side of Tolani's bed and stood there in complete silence. Tolani looked up at her older sister, tears filling her eyes, and reached out to hold Morenike's hand. Tolani whispered that she knew everything now, that the doctors had told her how Morenike tore all the papers and gave up her own body to save her. Tolani told her that the family business, the houses, and everything their father left behind were nothing compared to having her sister back. Morenike looked down at their joined hands, a tear finally sliding down her face, washing away 7 years of hatred and bitterness. She squeezed Tolani's hand tightly, sat down on the edge of the bed, and told her younger sister that my conscience has been dealing with me for so long. But now they are going to rebuild their father's business together as family, and this time nobody will ever come between them again.